On September 16, 2006, a middle-aged man named Hector had just moved into a quiet and isolated neighborhood with his wife, Clara. That day, after shopping for household supplies, Hector accidentally dropped several items on the road because the trunk of his car had been left open while driving home. After carrying in a table Clara had wanted, Hector headed upstairs to rest for a while. With nothing much to do, he started looking around the area through a pair of binoculars and noticed a large water tank sitting not too far from the house. Not long after that, the house phone suddenly rang, but when Hector answered it, the caller stayed completely silent. Curious, he tried calling the number back, only to discover it was no longer active and connected directly to an operator service instead. As Hector recorded a message asking about the strange caller, he suddenly heard Clara entering the house, startling him so badly that he dropped the phone beneath the sofa. He then told Clara about the mysterious phone call, especially because nobody should have known their new home number yet. Still, the strange incident quickly faded into the background as the two continued enjoying their time together. While putting the phone back in place, Hector suddenly realized the voice recorder had been left running the entire time. Later that afternoon, Clara stayed busy assembling the new table while Hector relaxed upstairs with his binoculars again. That was when he noticed a young woman standing alone in the forest, slowly taking off her clothes. A short while later, Clara left the house to go shopping again. Once Hector returned to the binoculars, the mysterious woman had already disappeared. Unsure whether he had really seen anything at all, he kept searching the area from different angles until he spotted a piece of red fabric lying on the ground. His curiosity immediately took over, and Hector decided to head toward the forest to investigate. As he crossed the road, he noticed an overturned bicycle and a small trash cart abandoned nearby. Hector kept walking deeper into the woods while using the binoculars, getting closer and closer to the red cloth. Soon he could also see the woman's legs, but the moment Hector finally caught a clear look at her face, he lost his balance and fell. Shocked, he discovered the young woman sitting there unconscious and completely unclothed. Slowly, Hector approached the woman, whose name was Chica. Just as he tried to wake her up, someone suddenly attacked him from behind. Terrified and confused, Hector immediately ran away and hid behind a nearby tree. Using the binoculars again, he spotted a mysterious figure standing in the forest with bandages completely wrapped around its head. Now completely panicked, Hector continued running through the woods. He had no idea that the man chasing him was connected to something far worse. This is time crimes. While climbing over a wire fence, he slipped and badly injured his hand. Lost and unable to find his way home, Hector wandered aimlessly until he eventually came across a strange house in the middle of nowhere. After knocking several times without getting any response, he finally smashed one of the windows and climbed inside. Inside the house, Hector discovered a strange drawing hidden behind a calendar, showing an arrow marked with two crosses. As he explored further, he found a hidden doorway connected to several different rooms, including what appeared to be a medical room. Luckily, there were bandages and medicine inside, so Hector quickly treated the stab wound on his arm. He then continued deeper into the building until he reached a research room where he found a walkie-talkie still connected to the owner of the house, a man named Jovan. Hector immediately explained that someone had been chasing him and trying to kill him, forcing him to flee into the house for safety. It turned out Jovan was staying in another building nearby, and he asked whether the mysterious man chasing Hector was wearing bandages around his head. After hearing Hector confirm it, Jovan revealed that he had also seen the strange man climbing over the same wire fence earlier. Still, he assured Hector there was no need to panic because the area around the house was covered by security cameras, and he planned to contact the police. Without wasting any time, Hector quickly barricaded the research room door. But moments later, Jovan admitted that he actually could not call the police because the other phone lines had been blocked. On top of that, he did not even have a cell phone since they were apparently forbidden in that location. From where Jovan was standing, he could already see the mysterious figure slowly approaching the house. Because of that, he instructed Hector to leave immediately and head toward another building located on top of a nearby hill. Following Jovan's directions through the walkie-talkie, Hector carefully moved along a narrow path lined with lights while Jovan monitored the mysterious man through the security cameras as he entered the house. Then suddenly, several of the camera feeds went dead. Jovan immediately told Hector to start running as fast as possible, but because of his age and exhaustion, Hector quickly ran out of breath and begged for the pathway lights to be turned off so the stranger would not be able to see him clearly. As the mysterious man got closer in his car, Hector finally reached the building where Jovan was waiting, which turned out to be a laboratory. Once inside, Hector was ordered to hide in a massive water-filled tank, while Jovan promised he would enter after the hatch had been sealed. For several minutes, Hector remained submerged underwater inside the strange machine. But when the hatch finally opened again, something felt completely wrong. Somehow, it was suddenly late afternoon. Hector stood there in confusion, unable to understand how time had changed so quickly. Strangely enough, Jovan also seemed confused and asked who Hector was and why he had appeared inside the tank, as if they had never met before. Hector insisted that Jovan himself had told him to hide there, but Jovan had no memory of it at all. Trying to make sense of the situation, Jovan came to a shocking conclusion. He explained that the machine Hector had just entered was actually a time machine. At that moment, Hector noticed the large white water tank standing above the laboratory, the exact same one he had seen earlier from his house through the binoculars. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Hector immediately looked toward his home through the binoculars once again. And there, standing outside the house, was himself. He watched his own double returning home with groceries and carrying the table Claire had wanted earlier that day. That was the moment Hector realized the truth. He had traveled several hours back into the past, returning to the afternoon of September 16th, 2006. From there, the two of them headed into Jovan's house, where he used a calendar to explain the impossible situation. According to him, there were now two versions of Hector existing at the same time. The first Hector was the one who had just returned home from shopping, while the second Hector was the one currently standing in front of him after traveling through time. Because of that, Jovan planned to reactivate the time machine and asked Hector 2 to remain hidden inside the house for now. The plan was simple in theory. They would allow Hector 1 to go through the exact same events as before until later that night, when he would eventually enter the machine and be sent back in time. Once that happened, only Hector 2 would remain. Still, Jovan begged Hector not to tell anyone about the existence of the machine because he had been using it without permission, and he feared he could end up in prison if people found out. Afterward, Jovan returned to the research room while Hector secretly called his own house to confirm whether the man he had seen earlier was truly himself. And then, the exact same moment repeated itself. Hector 1 answered the phone just like before, but the shock of hearing his own voice left Hector 2 completely speechless. A short while later, the phone rang again because the recorded message from earlier had already been triggered. Hearing this immediately frustrated Jovan, who warned Hector 2 that even the smallest change could ruin everything. If the timeline shifted too much, Hector 1 might never enter the machine later that night. If that happened, Hector 1 would continue living normally with Clara, while Hector 2 would be left with no place in the world and no idea what kind of life he was even supposed to live. On top of that, Hector 2 could not simply go to the police or return home to explain everything to Clara. The existence of two identical Hectors would throw everything into chaos and attract massive attention. Even though Jovan told him to stay put, Hector could not resist checking on his house personally. He took Jovan's car and drove out through a security gate that could only be opened using a remote attached to the car keys. While driving down the road, Hector suddenly spotted Chica riding her bicycle nearby. Then out of nowhere, a red car slammed directly into her. The impact caused Hector's own car to crash into a tree, leaving his head badly injured and covered in blood. Still dazed from the accident, Hector removed the bandage wrapped around his arm and tied it around his bleeding head. And that was when the horrifying truth finally became clear. The mysterious man with the bandaged face had been Hector himself all along. Not long after the crash, Chica arrived to check on Hector after hearing the sound of the accident. When she noticed the bandages wrapped around his head, Hector quickly claimed that someone had shot him, though he insisted the injury was not too serious. Chica wanted to call an ambulance, but there was no signal in the area, so she planned to search for a public phone instead. Hector immediately stopped her, pretending he was still too dizzy and needed her help nearby. After giving him some water, Chica pulled out a pair of scissors to clean up the messy bandages around his head. But the moment Hector saw the scissors, he quickly grabbed them himself, knowing exactly how they would eventually be used. A little later, Hector convinced Chica to follow him somewhere because he supposedly needed her help. Chica left her bicycle beside a trash bin, while Hector picked up an old black coat nearby and put it on. At first, Chica became suspicious when Hector led her toward the hill. Still, because he kept begging for help, she reluctantly agreed to follow him. From there, Hector 2 searched for the exact location where Hector 1 had originally seen Chica removing her clothes through the binoculars. As Chica grew increasingly uncomfortable, she suddenly tried to run away, but Hector eventually caught up to her again. At that point, Hector 2 finally snapped and threatened to kill Chica if she refused to obey him. Terrified for her life, she had no choice but to follow his instructions.
No!
Haz lo que te digo.
Hector forced Chica to recreate every single detail he had witnessed earlier so that Hector 1 would experience the exact same events. Hector 2 did all of this because of Joven's warning. He knew he could not allow the timeline to change. If Hector 1 failed to follow the same path, he might never reach the laboratory and enter the time machine later that night. As Chica removed her pants, she suddenly kicked Hector and tried escaping again, leaving the red pants behind in the exact location where Hector had originally found them earlier. Hector chased after her and managed to catch her, but during the struggle, they rolled across the ground, causing Chica to hit her head and lose consciousness. Hector then tossed away the binoculars because they were only slowing him down. He carried Chica over to a group of rocks and removed the rest of her clothes, placing them near the red pants exactly where he remembered seeing them before. Not long after that, Hector 1 finally arrived at the scene. And just as Hector 1 approached Chica's unconscious body, Hector 2 stabbed his own earlier self in the arm with the scissors. Afterward, Hector 2 followed Hector 1 through the forest and intentionally turned his head at the exact moment Hector 1 peeked from behind the tree, recreating the terrifying image of the bandaged stranger. A few moments later, Hector 2 heard Chica scream after waking up and realizing she was naked. Convinced she had fled toward the nearby house, Hector immediately chased after her. When he arrived at the house, he could hear music playing upstairs. But the moment he tried climbing to the second floor, Chica suddenly threw objects at him before hiding inside the attic room. After falling backward, Hector quickly got back on his feet and tried calming her down. But when she refused to answer, Hector 2 smashed open the attic door and chased her onto the rooftop as she desperately tried to escape. Then, in a horrifying moment, Hector grabbed the woman's leg and pulled her down from the roof. But the second she fell, Hector froze in complete shock. The woman he had just pulled to her death was wearing red clothes and had short hair. It was not Chica. It was Clara.
¡Espera! ¡Clara! ¡Clara!
Completely devastated, Hector 2 could only sit there in silence while listening through the walkie-talkie as Hector 1 continued speaking with Joven nearby. After the conversation between Hector 1 and Joven finally ended, Hector 2 admitted the truth. He revealed that he himself was the mysterious man with the bandaged face. He then instructed Joven to lure Hector 1 toward the laboratory while he headed there separately using the black car. Once he arrived, Hector 2 peeked through the laboratory window exactly like before, recreating the same moment that had terrified him earlier. Right on cue, Hector 1 entered the time machine. After Hector 1 was sent back into the past, Joven stepped outside to meet Hector 2 and brought him back to the house for treatment. Since Hector 1 had now disappeared into the timeline, Hector 2 had effectively become the original surviving version. But Hector refused to accept what had happened. Desperate to save Clara, he demanded that Joven send him back in time once again. Unfortunately, Joven explained that the machine could no longer function because he had already thrown away its energy battery. He also warned Hector about the danger of traveling back again. If Hector returned to the past and changed events, there would now be 3 versions of him existing simultaneously. Hector 1, Hector 2, and a new version known as Hector 3. According to Joven, that kind of chain reaction could create consequences far beyond their control. Still, Hector believed he could fix everything by eliminating the other 2 versions of himself. Then Hector suddenly realized something strange. Joven had thrown away the energy battery before Hector even arrived, almost as if someone had instructed him to do it in advance. After being threatened, Joven finally confessed the truth. It turned out that Hector 3 had already appeared earlier. Before Hector 2 even stepped out of the machine, Hector 3 had emerged just seconds ahead of him. According to Joven, Hector 3 had ordered him to stay beside Hector 2 until Hector 1 entered the machine, and under no circumstances allow Hector 2 to use the machine again. Hector 3 had also contacted him through the walkie-talkie, expressing regret and fear that eventually everyone would discover what they had done. Not long after that, the discarded energy battery was recovered. Then suddenly the sound of police sirens echoed nearby. That meant Hector 3 had already contacted the police himself in an attempt to finally put an end to everything. Even so, Hector 2 still chose to enter the machine again because he was determined to save Clara and somehow erase the other versions of himself. As soon as the machine activated, time shifted backward once more by several hours. Back in the past, Jovan had only just arrived at the laboratory when he suddenly heard knocking coming from inside the machine. When he opened it, Hector 2 emerged once again, now becoming Hector 3. Without hesitation, Hector 3 immediately took control of the situation and forced Jovan to obey his instructions, threatening to expose the illegal time machine if he refused. Hector 3 then explained the horrifying reality they were now trapped in. At this point, he needed to eliminate the other two versions of himself, Hector 1 and Hector 2. In just a few more seconds, Hector 2 would appear from the machine, and Jovan was instructed to guide him through the same sequence of events that would eventually lead Hector 1 back into the time machine. At this point, the situation had become unbelievably complicated. Because time had been pushed back several hours once again, Jovan was completely confused after suddenly meeting Hector 3 and realizing his machine truly worked. Meanwhile, the main Hector, who had now become Hector 3, was focused on a single goal. He wanted to eliminate the other two versions of himself while somehow saving Clara at the same time. Not long after that, Hector 2 finally emerged from the laboratory, confused by the sudden jump in time that had brought him back to the afternoon once again. Hector 3 immediately instructed Jovan to calm Hector 2 down and stay beside him because he needed to reach the house before Hector 2 did. Later, while Hector 2 and Jovan stood there in shock after spotting Hector 1 outside the house, Hector 3 quickly drove away in a nearby golf car, determined to save Clara before the tragedy repeated itself. However, he soon realized there was a problem. The security gate could only be opened using Jovan's remote control. Because of that, Hector 3 turned back and returned to Jovan's house, where Jovan had just finished talking with Hector 2. But since the white car and its remote would eventually be needed by Hector 2, Hector 3 borrowed another vehicle instead, a red truck that Jovan allowed him to use. Moments later, Hector 2 suddenly sped away in the white car, and Hector 3 immediately chased after him before the gate automatically closed. Then came another horrifying realization. The red vehicle that had crashed into Hector 2 earlier had actually been driven by Hector himself the entire time. Hector 3 intentionally rammed Hector 2's car in an attempt to kill him and finally break the cycle. But things went wrong once again. Hector 2 survived the crash, while Hector 3 lost control after slamming into a trash container, causing another accident that left his face even more bruised and battered. At that moment, Hector finally began to understand the terrible truth. No matter what he tried to change, every action he took was only recreating the exact same events that had already happened before. Realizing this, Hector confessed his regret to Jovan through the walkie-talkie, accepting that he had become trapped inside a loop he could no longer escape. Not long after that, Chica, who had finally regained consciousness and escaped from Hector 2, ended up crossing paths with Hector 3 instead. Of course, Chica had no idea they were actually the same person, because Hector 2 had been wearing bandages around his face. Hector 3 pretended that he too had been attacked by the mysterious bandaged man. Completely exhausted from everything that had happened, Hector 3 eventually fell asleep. By the time evening arrived, Chica woke him up after spotting a nearby house where they might be able to ask for help. Ironically, the house was Hector's own home. Chica helped Hector 3 inside and sat him down while she searched for someone who could help them. Not long afterward, Clara arrived home and was horrified when she saw the condition of her husband's face. She also warned him that a man with bandages wrapped around his head was heading toward the house. Because of that, Clara immediately called the police. Hearing this shocked Hector 3 because he finally realized the person who had contacted the police earlier had never been him at all. It had been Clara. At that moment, Hector 3 understood that his only remaining goal was to save his wife's life. He quickly hid Clara inside a storage shed near the yard and instructed her not to come out no matter what happened. Afterward, Hector 3 climbed upstairs and entered the second floor through a window. The noise immediately caught the attention of Hector 2, who rushed upstairs while Chica remained hiding inside the attic room nearby. Without hesitation, Hector 3 threw Clara's table directly at Hector 2, knocking him down. Then Hector 3 convinced Chica that the bandaged man was a dangerous lunatic and that she needed to disguise herself and stay hidden. That was when Hector cut Chica's hair short. The horrifying truth was that Hector had unknowingly chosen Chica to become the victim in Clara's place. He needed Hector 2 to believe the same events were unfolding again, so the timeline would continue exactly as before, except this time Clara would survive. Hector 3 then sent Chica into the attic room to hide. While Hector 2 chased after Chica upstairs, Hector 3 quietly slipped outside, brought Clara out from the storage shed, and sat beside her peacefully in the yard. A few moments later, Chica's scream echoed through the night as Hector 2 pulled her from the rooftop, believing she was Clara. Still, Hector 3 calmly reassured his wife and told her not to panic. At last, Hector believed everything was finally over. Clara had survived, the police were on their way, and soon the truth behind the horrifying events would finally be uncovered. But in reality, nothing had truly changed. Everything that had just happened was always meant to happen exactly that way. And that meant the endless cycle between Hector 1, Hector 2, and Hector 3 would continue repeating forever, trapped inside the same loop again and again, with no real escape. So the moral of the story is, if you ever see yourself wearing head bandages in the future, just go home and sleep because curiosity is way too expensive.